Airfields and Air Shows, Air Mindedness in Rutherford County, Tennessee. I'm Jared Bryson, a PhD student in the Middle Tennessee State University Public History program. The ubiquity of air travel in 2019 means that the invention of the airplane is simply taken for granted. But what I want to do in this presentation is to give you a glimpse of the evolution of what has come to be known as air-mindedness, that enthusiastic pursuit of all things aviation. For me, this began as a child visiting Shaw Air Force Base in South Carolina, sitting at the end of the runway with my father and watching F-4 Phantoms doing touch and goes. I also love seeing air shows, those highly choreographed aerial ballets whose performances utterly thrill the senses. The passion for flight and all things aviation rapidly took hold of the Western imagination. I want to briefly show how this spirit became ubiquitous in Tennessee and more locally in Rutherford County. Today, the lingering contrails of a passing airliner may seem utterly ephemeral, and yet their presence has become inscribed on the landscape. Through the relatively early construction of airfields, terminals, and runways, Rutherford County enjoyed, and still enjoys, a close connection to its evolving aviation heritage. The aviation revolution really began in December 1903. What transpired on the windswept dunes of Kill Devil Hills in North Carolina was due to the genius of a tobacco-spitting engineer from East Tennessee. In 1893, Edward Huffaker, a civil engineer with a freshly minted master's degree in mathematics from the University of Virginia, submitted a paper to the Congress on Aerial Navigation entitled "The Value of Curved Surfaces in Flight." He had been working with the Secretary of the Smithsonian, Samuel Langley, on glider models he launched from the tower of the Smithsonian Castle on the National Mall. Aviation enthusiast and philanthropist Octave Chanute brought Hoffaker and the Wright brothers together in North Carolina. The Wrights incorporated his technological innovations of curved wings for lift and wing warping for control into their Wright Flyer design. It would be a few more years before Tennessee witnessed the fruits of their labors. A motorcycle manufacturer named Glenn Curtiss became an early adapter of the airplane. His experience with lightweight engines were readily incorporated into his aircraft designs. He exhibited his 50-horsepower biplane at the Memphis Fairgrounds in April 1910. In the run-up to the First World War, Curtiss chose Memphis Municipal Airport as one of the centers for his pioneering work in aircraft manufacturing. At the close of World War I, surplus aircraft were finding their way back to the United States from Europe. Veteran pilots and aviation enthusiasts turned entrepreneurs began moving around the country in barnstorming flying circuses. Relatively rugged aircraft such as the Curtiss JN-4 Jenny could land in a pasture and begin charging locals for rides. Here you see a 19-year-old Catherine Stinson, pioneering aviatrix, suffragette, and entrepreneur on her flight from New York to Washington, D.C. Tennessee aviation historian Jim Fulbright noted, by 1914, exhibiting aircraft had become big business. Performers would earn up to $1,000 a day on the fairground circuit. Stinson's exhibitions took her to Nashville on November 17, 1914. Sponsor of the event, Nashville's Tennessean and American newspapers touted it in their advance publicity as one of the most thrilling of all aerial demonstrations. During her performance, she raced a car driven by her sister, dropped practice bombs, and parachuted a dummy to simulate how spies could be delivered behind enemy lines. Later, Stinson's family returned to Nashville in 1939 to open an aircraft plant at Berry Field. Tennessee was one of the first states to establish a flying component of their National Guard. Known as the 105th Observation Squadron, they were based in Nashville at Blackwood Field and often performed flying demonstrations for the public. They would later be based at Sky Harbor in Rutherford County. Apart from the capital city, Middle Tennessee's opportunity to participate in the newly emerging air age came with the construction of Sky Harbor on roughly 200 acres a few miles north of Murfreesboro. Interstate Airlines, which would later become American Airlines, literally found greener pastures for their air service in Rutherford County and bypassed Nashville's older McConnell Field, which was surrounded by low-lying hills and suffered from consistently inclement weather. In March of 1929, the Nashville Tennessean newspaper announced that the new airport had a runway that was nearly a mile long and boasted facilities for both day and night flying. Only Chattanooga and Memphis could claim similar facilities. A state-of-the-art terminal in the Spanish colonial style had both a roof restaurant and an observation deck. A large hangar served as home to a flying school and maintenance services. Interstate Airlines hoped that the proximity to the NC and St. Louis rail line would allow coordination between train and airline passengers, making it a truly integrated service. Interstate Airlines held the airmail franchise between Chicago and Atlanta. Most of the routes ran at night. By 1934, after the passage of the Airmail or Kelly Act, Eastern Airlines, then owned by General Motors, opened a route through Sky Harbor. To build the terminal facilities, the Secretary for the Rutherford County Chamber of Commerce approached notable celebrities to donate building bricks. President Hoover and a number of governors contributed. The very first brick was gold-plated and arrived via airmail from Swallow Airplane Company, a predecessor of Cessna, in Wichita, Kansas. George Bassett, Swallow Airplane Company's general manager, predicted that Sky Harbor could be developed into one of the outstanding terminals in the United States. Celebrity aviators and aviatrixes made calls into Sky Harbor throughout its brief existence. Air races and air shows occurred annually. The veterans of foreign wars even hosted an air show at the field as late as 1947. Some 14,000 spectators turned out to see Amelia Earhart fly in with the opening day festivities, and Jimmy Doolittle dropped by for a show the following year. The rapidly accelerating pace of aircraft technologies required longer paved runways that could accommodate instrument landings and larger aircraft. Only 8 short years after it was hailed as one of the South's premier airports, commercial activity came to an end at Sky Harbor. By 1937, it was eclipsed by a new location only 18 miles to the north. 3 major air routes crossed through the state's capital city. One ran from Memphis to Louisville, a second started in Atlanta and terminated in Nashville, and a third hopped from Memphis to Knoxville to Bristol. By 1934, it was clear that Nashville needed a more spacious airport with lighted and paved runways in closer proximity to the residents of the city. On a 340-acre site about 8 miles north of the Rutherford County line, 3 runways were laid out and a state-of-the-art facility constructed. In a move that assuaged some of the Depression-era malaise about local spending, the U.S. Bureau of Air Commerce matched the construction funds from the city, and the Works Progress Administration offered employment on the project. Some 40,000 people attended the dedication ceremony and air show on November 1, 1936. At the event, Captain Eddie Rickenbacker, the leading Army Air Service ace of World War I and first CEO of Eastern Airlines, proclaimed Nashville's airport to be one of the 5 best in the world. In October 1939, the Nashville Municipal Airport was renamed Berry Field, Nashville, designated BNA, in honor of the Tennessee WPA Administrator Colonel Harry Smith Berry, who oversaw construction of the airport. In the second decade of the 21st century, Berry Field, renamed the Nashville International Airport, sits on nearly 4,000 acres with 4 runways and serves 12 airlines, 3 cargo carriers, and more than 14 million passengers annually. With the clouds of war looming in early 1941, Governor Prentice Cooper assembled a team to pitch an idea to the War Department in Washington, D.C. in order to create an Army Air training base in Tennessee. Approval came only 3 days after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. The countryside in the town of Smyrna, 12 miles south of Berryfield, was chosen as a heavy bomber transition base. Within 7 months, the base was constructed and training began for pilots selected to fly the B-24 heavy bombers. Hundreds of pilots passed through the program at Smyrna and went on to frontline assignments in the European and Pacific theaters. After the war, a shuffle ensued with the Army Air Force Training Command decommissioning in 1947. However, it promptly reactivated as the Smyrna Air Force Base in 1948, becoming the 9th Air Force's 314 Troop Carrier Wing. By 1950, it was renamed again Seward Air Force Base in honor of Major Alan Seward, who had been killed in combat over the Solomon Islands. His father was a member of the 105th Observation Squadron based in Middle Tennessee. Throughout the period of the Cold War, Seward Air Force Base hosted a number of aviation transport units flying C-123 Providers, C-119 flying boxcars, C-130 Hercules, and even helicopters like the H-21 Workhorse. With the fence cuts in 1971, the main property was handed over to the Nashville Airport Authority, and 20 years after that, the property again changed hands, this time to the Rutherford County Airport Authority. Today, Smyrna Airport is the third largest airport in the state after Memphis and Nashville. It is the busiest general aviation or private transportation airport in the state, but also supports corporate, military, and cargo traffic. Since this presentation is primarily about air-mindedness in Tennessee, it is appropriate to mention Cornelia Clark Ford. She was a United States aviator who became famous for being part of two of aviation-related events. The first occurred while conducting a civilian training flight at Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, when she was the first United States pilot to encounter the Japanese air fleet during the attack on Pearl Harbor. She and her student narrowly escaped a mid-air collision with the Japanese aircraft and a strafing attack after making an emergency landing. The following year, Ford became the second member of what was to become the Women Air Force Service Pilots, or WASPs. Cornelia was working as a WASP ferry pilot on the 21st of March 1943 when she became the first female pilot in American history to die in active duty. She was involved in a mid-air collision and crashed 10 miles south of Merkel, Texas. In 1943, the Army Air Force was using local colleges and universities for initial flight training. Middle Tennessee State Teachers College hosted the 11th Flight Training Detachment, and a grass runway and hangar were constructed in fields on campus to accommodate the program. A digital photo in the Middle Tennessee State University Albert Gore Research Center notes, college training detachments instituted during World War II consisted of cadets who qualified for flight training with the Army Air Corps. Prior to entering more specialized flight programs, the cadets received 5 months of academic and military instruction at colleges throughout the nation. Each cadet received approximately 10 hours of dual instruction in light airplanes, during which they learned elementary flight maneuvers, landing, and traffic procedures. In early 1946, an aviation club was formed and offered membership to both male and female students who had flown before or were taking courses in aeronautics from the Department of Industrial Arts. With the construction of the Murfreesboro Municipal Airport, the campus field stopped operation around 1952. The current Aerospace Department building was constructed on top of the area of the runway and the hangar repurposed for the ROTC's indoor rifle range. In 1952, the city of Murfreesboro established an airport on the north side of the city. Initially, it consisted of a turf runway, but by 1961, it was paved and lighted. An independent aerospace department was formed around 1971 and initially offered aviation technology and aviation management programs. Within a decade, the professional pilot and maintenance curricula were also added. Middle Tennessee State University is the largest tenant at the airport. It's one of the few self-supporting airports in the state. The model for operations generates revenue solely from leases and fuel sales. In addition to the two public paved runways in Rutherford County, There are about 10 other private grass strips. These turf runways are often referred to as aerodromes and tend to lack the amenities necessary for instrument or night landings. Russell Puckett operated a lucrative grocery business in Middle Tennessee. In 1938, he established a 2,000-foot-long grass strip in nearby Bedford County. He offered local residents airplane rides and also became an early aircraft dealer, selling Piper airplanes. Today, the field hosts the Eagleville Soaring Club. Some of the local airfields operate as air parks in which multiple homes are built immediately adjacent to a runway. One aerodrome owner, Donald McDonald, lives in the Blackman area of Rutherford County. He has close ties to MTSU. He frequently encourages grass landing experiences among the professional pilot students. Murfreesboro native Margaret Ray Seaton is a physician and retired NASA astronaut. After being selected as part of a first group of astronauts to include women, she flew on 3 space shuttle flights as mission specialist for STS-51D and STS-40 and as payload commander for STS-58. Both before and after her career in the astronaut program, she has been active in the medical community in Tennessee, Mississippi, and Texas. From its inception, the invention of the airplane created a relationship with the military. The Wright brothers' first public demonstration of their flyer occurred at Fort Myer, Virginia in 1908. They hoped to have a buyer for their new flying machine in the U.S. Army. The first night flight occurred at the Nashville Fairgrounds on June 22, 1910, by Charles Hamilton during the Grand Military Tournament. The arrival of the Curtiss Plane Company in Nashville was accompanied by stunts flown by World War I ace Major Victor Strong. The creation of Sky Harbor in Rutherford County provided many opportunities for the public to enjoy an air show, air circus, or even take a joyride. The airport offered a spectacle that most people from the surrounding counties would never have the privilege of seeing. During the opening of Nashville's Municipal Airport in 1936, the commander of the Army Air Corps was present, along with World War I ace Eddie Rickenbacker, who you see here. The crowds were treated to performances by Army Air Corps pursuit planes and precision formation flying. It wasn't until the end of the Second World War that the U.S. military developed their dedicated display teams. The Navy created the Blue Angels in 1946, and the relatively newly formed Air Force created the Thunderbirds in 1953 in the wake of the Korean War. Their existence was an intentional effort to bolster support for the military. They began performing at air shows and base open houses across the United States and in several foreign countries. The demonstration teams flew frontline combat aircraft and performed precision maneuvers that had been developed as far back as the First World War. The teams came from combat units that had flown missions in Southeast Asia during the Vietnam War. Much of the rhetoric used in press releases and newspaper stories related the advanced technology to their use in current conflicts. Each show is meant to produce a sense of awe. From precision close formation flying to tight maneuvers and high-speed passes, the aircraft's performance charged every one of the senses. Crowds squint into the distant sky watching the aerial dance. The high-G turns in full afterburner rip the air with their sound, and exhausted aviation fuel drifts across the field. Only the military possess the advanced forms of technology on display. Their aircraft fly higher and faster, turn quicker, and make more noise than anything in the civilian world. The teams intend to impress. Air shows that host a military demonstration team will often draw crowds numbering 100,000 or more during a weekend show. The International Council of Air Shows estimates that between 10 and 12 million people attend air shows annually. The Thunderbirds flew their first demonstration at Berry Field in Nashville in 1955, and then Seward Air Force Base began their open house shows. They took up top billing. The Donaldson Rotary Club began Nashville's Aviation Days as a charity fundraiser in 1968. They hosted the event with the Blue Angels at Nashville Airport. They also flew the following year. But by 1970, the prospect of disrupting commercial air traffic proved untenable. Conveniently that year, Seward Air Force Base had been turned over to the Nashville Airport Authority, and the Rotary Club decided on a more low-key air circus without military demonstration teams. However, the former base afforded a great deal of space for the public without the disruption of regularly scheduled commercial flights. By 1971, the big-ticket military demonstration teams were back. That year, it was the Air Force Thunderbirds. They alternated services so that in 1972, it was the Blue Angels, and in 1973, it was the Air Force Thunderbirds. The show took a break in 1974, but the following year, the Rotary Club went big. The Blue Angels came back, and the show was the third biggest in the nation. Middle Tennessee State University was even a co-sponsor of the event. The Donaldson Rotary Club ended their sponsorship of the Nashville Aviation Days in 2001 when the show, which was scheduled for mid-September, was canceled, along with all other air traffic across the entire country due to the September the 11th attacks. The next year, the Smyrna Airport continued to host the air shows, alternating active and fallow years, but still bringing the military display teams as top billing. In 2017, a Navy Blue Angel crashed during practice, and the pilot, Marine Aviator Captain Jeff Cuss, was killed. The following year, a full-size F-18 Hornet in Blue Angel's livery was mounted as a memorial at the airport's entrance. A new team will fly in 2019. According to the Smyrna Airport manager John Black, the break in continuity is intentional. The Navy has chosen not to look back, for aviation's air mindedness is a forward-looking endeavor. In March 2019, the U.S. Navy announced the acquisition of new aircraft for the Blue Angels, the F-18 Super Hornet. This marks a return to the use of frontline combat aircraft for public display and a dramatic increase in capability as they perform their aerial ballet for the masses. So what would I like to see happen next? I want to move from the very local to the international. As artifacts of modern technology, the fighter aircraft on display play a central role in cementing relationships with America's allies abroad and their public. The scope for future research will explore the role that the military aerial demonstration teams have played as diplomatic liaisons when they perform abroad. Air-mindedness is a global phenomenon. Thank you.